Teachers of Reddit, besides violence, or threats of it, what's the scariest thing you've seen a student do? I saw 2 first graders try to play pets by having one tie their scarf around the other's neck and use it like a leash to drag the other kid around. Me plus another adult had to run over because the girl with the scarf around her neck was starting to turn blue. That's the scariest part about working with little kids. They keep almost killing themselves or their peers and they never understand just how close to death they are. A 15-year-old student, on the first day of summer term, poured a bottle of white spirit over himself. Another 2 bottles over his school blazer. Set fire to the jacket and put it on. Sadly, the student died of shock and the school was closed for the rest of the week. The fact that he put the jacket on after he had lit it was the scariest thing about the whole tragic episode. Repeatedly punch a cinder block wall until his knuckles started bleeding. Wound up with multiple broken bones in his hand. Had to wear a cast for a couple of months. Scariest thing I heard a student say, other than the usual threats of violence, was a 15-year-old girl who said she was going to every guy she could until she got pregnant. A kid was mad that he couldn't get more ketchup with his fries. And told my coworker, "I hope your baby dies." My coworker just shrugged it off. She didn't have any children. 2 weeks later, she found out she was 6 weeks pregnant. I didn't see it, but a girl stole razor blades during science class. Another girl saw it, but as they were friends she didn't tell the teacher. She tried to commit suicide a week later with those razor blades. The other girl who saw her steal was devastated. Nobody suspected she was suicidal. When I was in 6th grade, one watched a 7-year-old have a complete meltdown screaming about how they just wanted to die and to let them die. Scary. 2 years ago a kid brought a gun to school, it was unloaded. This was just 2 days after the Santa Fe school shooting. The school was also within 20 miles of that shooting. Junior in high school proposed to his sophomore girlfriend. Then they got married the following year after she turned 17. Had a very unusual student who just seemed to be out of it. Not on drugs or anything. But just not altogether there. Anyway, he was doing really poorly in the class. And hung out afterwards to see if there was any way he could pass the course. I explained, gently, that it wasn't going to happen, as we had one assignment left, and he currently had a sub 20% average. He smiled, all with a 1,000-yard stare, and said, "Thank you," and left. The classroom had windows overlooking the quad area. I watched him walk down the sidewalk for a few yards and then just unleash a massive fuck into the sky, complete with arms spread out. Then he started to kick the out of his book bag. I hightailed it out of there. Once had an adult student I was tutoring to help with his writing skills. As these things go, I encouraged him to respond to a series of prompts that could be freewriting. But I made the mistake of calling it a journal, which, for some students, means they write down anything that comes to mind. He insisted that I read his journal, quite forcefully, and I said I would take it home and give him feedback later that week when we met again. Each entry talked about how he loved to cut out pictures of and paste to his walls. At night, they would talk to him. I later found out he was a offender. Not a teacher at the time. But in college, one student got a bad grade on an assignment and ran out of the building into a tiny backyard area. He took out a gigantic knife and just started stabbing the ground over and over again. I watched from the second-floor patio as students gathered in a circle around him to watch. I never saw him again. This was at a high school for teens who had diagnoses of mental health issues. So all the kids were used to getting lots of therapy and sharing issues. The kids had some problems and it was a super supportive school. One Tuesday, we came to discover that a sophomore sent her term art project to her teacher saying she thought it turned out pretty well. Then she hung herself. No note. Nothing. Not an accident. She sent her homework to her teacher and then killed herself. Nobody knew why, and it is still the saddest and scariest thing. You never know. You just never know. Kids don't always talk. I'm not a teacher, but my boyfriend is. During a school assembly, he went to check and make sure all the kids were where they should be. He caught a student trying to hang herself and luckily stopped it from happening. He got her help that day and further help with the underlying issues after that. My sister taught a student that would occasionally faint or pass out if she didn't get enough hydration. One day she went on a fast cleanse and fainted at the top of the stairs and fell down 2 flights before being caught by a box on the side. She broke her wrist and collarbone and fractured her skull. Not a teacher. But when I was in high school I had a history teacher who was super cool, but she was really young as she was a recent college grad. I think she was like 24-25. She was really attractive too. She would always come in like an hour or 2 early to get paperwork and grading done. Once some of the students figured this out, there were multiple times that boys would stand outside her doorway and jerk off to her. They had to start having security in her hallway. Not a teacher but a student. Bio class, and it was that time of year where we had to dissect a frog. 10 minutes into the lesson. All well and good. But just as we were being told what we were doing, the quiet kid raises his hand and announces, "I've finished, sir." That kid had systematically cut out everything, brain, lungs, ECT, and put it on the table. Note, we had never dissected stuff before. WTLF. Worked with elementary school-aged kids for years. The scariest ones aren't the kids actually being violent or threatening. It's the few I came across that had honest sociopathic tendencies. And were smart enough to hide their actions and put on a good face. The ones I'm thinking of enjoy hurting others and getting away with it. But that's not the scary part really. Kids are still developing and they aren't good at being deceitful. It's the ones who you see learning how to be better liars and better at hiding their cruelty. The ones you see getting better at faking empathy. You get to see that lovely little horrible development and can't stop it no matter what approach. Some people just simply don't have that core kernel of decency even the brattiest kid still possesses. At the end of the day they simply don't care about anyone else and you can't change that. I guess those kids didn't really scare me. But what they will inevitably become does. I was in the class for this one. Chemistry, and we are investigating an unknown liquid supplied by the teacher. Basically working our way down a list of tests to try to figure out what this stuff is. Teacher is wandering around giving advice and comments on people's results. Come to this one group and asks, "Which step are you on?" Gets the reply, "Nitrating the unknown, sir." Teacher goes white. Turns out that there was a problem with a reagent used in the previous step which should have told them it was glycerin. But the test had not worked, so the group was all unknowing titrating nitrating mix into a test tube of glycerin. They evacuated and called the bomb squad. Seemed overkill for a few ml of explosive no matter how brisant. But that is school administrators for you. I was a chemistry TA when I had a student drop a 4-liter bottle of concentrated hydrochloric acid on the ground. Immediately you could see chlorine gas filling up our lab and neighboring labs. Luckily nobody got hurt, but it did do over 10K worth of damage to lab equipment and computers. It was actually much less damage than we expected. Put things in their mouths that don't belong. For discarded plastic, rocks, metal, electrical plugs, wire, and my students are ages 5 to 10. 7-year-old was bored in class. So he decided to smash the class fish tank and punch and bite the student teacher when she tried to stop him. The kid likely had some kind of development disorder, ADHD or ASD were bandied around some. But mom and dad refused to test him. So the teacher got no support to help him. Eventually he was taught completely separately from his classmates because he was viewed as a safety hazard with kids his own age. A supply teacher was telling us about the scariest part of his teacher career. He said that at another school he worked at he was in lunch duty. And a student had a heart attack. The student was a 14-year-old boy. Was one of the more athletic students. And he just had a heart attack. Unrehearsed, died right after it happened. I worked in a place as an art teacher and there was a child with severe autism that was not supposed to be in that facility I worked. Since it was too difficult for him to adjust and he got frustrated with everything and everyone. I'm quite small-framed as a person and one time something minor happened. He lost a card he had found and became obsessed. Someone took it for himself. He was a relatively strong and tall child for his age and started having a panic attack. He punched us all plenty of times and pushed us even though we did our best to explain he would finally find it. His mother didn't pick up the phone and not only couldn't we continue with the class, but all the children were scared and we were honestly not knowing what to do to calm him down. It was pretty scary and I felt bad for this child. Not a teacher, but there was this group of girls that manipulated boy in my kindergarten that had no friends and into laying in a suitcase, and they closed it and walked around with it as he was screaming because he couldn't breathe in there. I remember this because I actually wrote an essay inspired by it in school. The theme was horror story. Some of the girls who did this to this boy were actually sitting in this class. They later told me that they could sleep at night because of it.